Our speaker today is Larry Jennings. I met Larry around 2005 when we both served on the board. He was the president of the board at the time. He helped me find my place at Fellowship of the Inner Light. He encouraged me and welcomed the contributions that I could make as an experienced clergy person. Over the years, I have continued to find him personable and helpful to the people around him. Larry is a former funeral director with 45 years of service. He retired in 2020, but he is still available to do funeral services. Recently, he officiated at the service for George Jones, and he did so in the unique way of describing how George was doing in the afterlife. You see, Larry is able to see through the veil. I have always felt that funeral services should include a word about the departed and how they're doing. So what Larry did was an advancement in the evolution of conducting a homegoing service. Though retired, Larry remains active in the community, including serving as one of the pastors here at Fellowship of the Inner Light. As a pastor, he serves on the Pastoral Council. He's a member of the Masons belonging to Ruth Lodge, number 89 AF and AM in Norfolk, and has served as their treasurer since 2007. He's a member of the ARE and has studied the metaphysical for many years. He resides in the Carolan Farms section of Virginia Beach with his wife Sharon, and he enjoys spending time with his 16 grandchildren. Larry Jennings, won't you speak to us today?
Thank you for that welcome, Dick. Very, very thoughtful. I appreciated that very much. It's been an interesting year for, I think, all of us. As we can see, we're back in these masks today. We'll see where all this takes us. But it's been a nice summer so far. And I hope you're all enjoying it, even with today's rain. I know it's watering my garden. My flowers are liking it. My tomato plants are growing and hopefully producing more tomatoes with this fresh water today. Oh, it's been good. Yesterday, I just returned from the Outer Banks, where I spent a week with my wife Sharon and my middle daughter and her family. We stayed in Rodanthe, which is a beautiful spot on the coast, and thoroughly enjoyed the sunsets and sunrises. Each morning, I would get up early. I'm an early riser, so I was out there probably 4:30, 5 o'clock, in time to watch that sun come up. Sometimes I took my camera. Sometimes I just wanted to capture that beautiful view right here in my heart and my soul. And it was absolutely wonderful to see God's magnificence. Looking back at this year has been an interesting year for me, with many trials and tribulations. Difficult times, yes, but I've also had many very happy times. And each of these in their own way has made me stronger and made me more aware of the source that lives within me. I began the year recovering from COVID after having lie in bed the third week of December and very truthfully struggling for my life. I can remember lying there and wondering if I was going to survive this or if this was my time to cross over. I had reconciled myself to this fact and accepted it. While I laid there, I can remember reflecting on my life. I can remember thinking that I felt I had led a good life, and I hopefully had accomplished what my soul had come here to do. I had had many opportunities in my life and experiences with others to hopefully maybe put some smiles and joy in people's hearts and to help them. I also hoped that I had learned what my soul had come here to learn. Yes, these were the thoughts I had lying in that bed, being sick. This church and the teachings of Paul Solomon certainly had rubbed off on me to bring my thoughts to this. To give some insight, I was admitted to the hospital emergency room with a blood pressure of 50 over nothing. I had lost 22 pounds in 3 weeks. I could not talk or even stand. I crawled through my house and crawled to my car to get to the emergency room after I had fallen and needed some stitches. Breathing was a struggle, and still is at times, although it's drastically improving. My wife Sharon was also sick, and we truly, between the two of us, had very little strength. How your thoughts wander at a time like this. These thoughts and reflections that I was going through, it was like I was conducting my own life review. I was reaching out and thinking of those I had touched, those I had a positive relationship with, and I'd even thought about times when my actions or perhaps a thought had hurt someone. During this time, as I awaited my fate, I came across a reading on Facebook of all places, and I want to share what these words said to me. They said, "Breathe, let go of fear. You are fine just the way you are. The world does not need perfect people. It needs people who have fallen and gotten back up. People who have felt pain and let it made them wiser and more compassionate. It needs people who know how to create beauty out of ugliness. You, my friend, are exactly what the world needs. You may be scared and weary, and you may not be where you want to be right now, but you survived this long. That means you have the wisdom, strength, and fortitude to make your part of the world a bit more perfect. Okay, now exhale. Feel the courage go through you and go be amazing." When these words came to me, and again, that circle we live in, how things find you at the right time, these words renewed my strength and my will to live. I do not know who wrote it. I only know it came to me unexpectedly when I needed it most. I would repeat these words over and over as they continued to speak to me. I can remember a spark of life was ignited after reading this. Then instead of waiting for my transition, I felt renewed and empowered to stay in this world. I went from accepting the possibility of death to not wanting to leave this world, as I felt I had so much more to accomplish. Recently, talking to Lloyd and Susan here at church one day, we were talking and we brought up how we often have opportunities in our lives to cross over. This is one of mine, and I can distinctly remember 2 other times that I've talked to at this church before. One being a child, maybe 5 years old, and jumping into Long Lake in the Adirondacks, only to find myself sinking and not being able to swim. I can still relive this moment in my mind as it was peaceful and I was not frightened. I remember a presence from the waters pushing me to the surface of the lake and ending up in my oldest brother's arms, safe and secure. The second was traveling in a hearse on Interstate 95 in North Carolina. I was in the passenger seat, and the driver fell asleep at the wheel. I was also getting some sleep, getting ready for a long trip to Georgia to conduct a graveside service. I can remember a loud voice coming from within me, telling me to wake up and take the wheel. Crazy dream, as I thought. I pondered this and thought taking the wheel would not be a good idea. But the voice was relentless. and I found myself waking up and reaching for the wheel and instinctively steering us back on the road as we were traveling 70 miles an hour heading into a strand of trees. I saw that my partner that day had fallen asleep, and somehow I was wakened in time to save both of our lives. Now, 3 times an exit has been presented to me. I've had windows to opportunities to cross over. I hope I'm like a cat and have many more lives left. In all these instances, reflecting on what could have happened strengthened me. I learned from each of these experiences, and somehow it brought me to the realization that I do not fear my physical death, which is inevitable. Every experience becomes our teacher, and we can always understand the lesson, but we can be grateful. I remember fragments of my illness as I laid there in bed, and I want to share some of these with you, some that I can vividly recall. Often I would travel to the other side and visit people that had already crossed over, and they would keep sending me back. I can remember thinking of my grandchildren, wanting to see them grow up and lead lives of their own that kept me in this world. I saw some of you, my church family, as if in a dream as you helped support me through these confusing times. Yes, they were confusing. I was not in this world, but rather in a place between, and being so sick, it became hard to know which was real. Perhaps they both were. Phone calls from friends and family and pastors kept me grounded throughout my illness and my recovery. I will always treasure the voice of Susan Thomas, as her voice calmed me and brought me peace. I can remember you, Susan, in a dream when my fever was 104 for the 6th day in a row. We met in the most peaceful place you could ever imagine. I was not sick anymore. And we talked about how our lives have intertwined over the years and how we could share our deepest experiences with each other. This place that we stood was bathed in the most beautiful white light, and it was as if the white light were hugging me and giving me strength. I could hear water in the distance but couldn't see where it was coming from. It was absolutely a beautiful place to be. And then suddenly, I was back in my physical body, and I looked at the clock and it said 2 a.m. I'm so glad that it did not stay there. Again, I had made the choice to live. The circle that we live in and the connection we have with each other is beyond all understanding. It just is. When you accept that we are all one, you can build on that understanding. That simple but complex reading that I shared earlier contained the words that I read over and over, and within it gave me healing by reminding me simply to breathe and to let go of fear. After working in funeral services for 45 years, I thought I had experienced about everything until this happened to me. Brought back a lot of memories from helping families over the many years of service. Somehow this whole experience opened a portal, and I found myself tuning into this portal and having more experiences than I ever had before. For example, recently I was called by a family that had suffered a tragic loss. Yes, I am retired, but once a funeral director, always a funeral director. I come in when I'm asked to. In this instance, I knew I had to be there. Once the arrangements were made and everything was in place, I sat down that evening and let my thoughts go to this person. As my thoughts went to her, she spoke and told me that everything was all right, that she was exactly where she was supposed to be and that she was happy. She told me she understood how devastating her passing was, and when the time was right, she asked me to sit down with her family and help them to understand that I did not die. She said, I only went home so we could all have this experience. She went on to further explain that the intense grief we were all sharing and experiencing will help overcome her loss. But by her leaving, it would also help many people overcome things that had happened to them in their past lives. And she said when they went through the veil, they would understand, and she would be there to greet them. As the tears flowed down my face, she said, they must have this time to grow. After speaking to me, I suddenly saw a flash of brilliant white light above me, as if she was adding an exclamation point to our conversation. This one really threw me, because I cannot remember a more emotional loss with any family I had served. This moment in time brought me back to my teachings and what I had experienced. It brought me back to my understanding that everything happens for a purpose and all happens for the good. We will have good times, and yes, the sad times as well. Each of us play a role of who we are and how we grow. There are many stories I could tell you. Each of them are different, but each are the same. We are like children going to school and having to learn all these difficult lessons. I believe that there is a God who is leading us back to Him, her, and we are experiencing all these difficult and happy times for a purpose. We each have our own purpose and our own way of arriving where we are going, but the pathway is the same for each of us. That pathway that leads us back to our Creator, from where we were made to feel separate by design, so we could experience life to its fullest, and for God to experience life through all of us, the emotions, the laughter, the fear, and most importantly, to feel the love which is the true pathway home. A couple of weeks ago, as Dick talked about, I was asked to deliver a service for one of our own, George Jones Sr. I honestly didn't know George well, but I knew his beautiful wife, Angela, of 65 years. Angela and I have had many conversations before her husband crossed over. You see, Angela and I have a special bond as we attended seminary here together at the Fellowship of the Inner Light Church. And I can still clearly picture the day we were ordained together, along with several others who will always have a special place in my heart. Some of you here today, some of you will be watching this later on our Facebook. I still remember driving to the church that day, and Paul Solomon spoke to me and told us that each of us today will start a new pathway and will reach out to teach others that within them is the source of all understanding. Now back to George. I experienced George on the other side, opening myself up, specifically my third eye, as we sat and talked one day at their home, surrounded by family and in the room that he loved. His spirit was still there. It was alive in the photos. It was alive in the statues and the objects that surrounded that room, the pictures of his black Labrador retrievers. Not knowing George soon became a thing of the past, as I was able to speak to him. And as we conversed through the veil, he told me how happy he was. He also told me that he remained with his family for a while to make sure they were okay before he crossed over. As part of my message at his funeral, I simply told everyone that death does not exist. Strange thoughts from an old undertaker. Of course, physical death does happen, and we feel the pain of the separation. But life does continue, only on a different plane that Rob Grant simply called Going Home in a wonderful book published by the ARE. I know that there's no one in this room here today that would disagree with me with this. Whatever you call it, home or heaven, each of us here knows that life continues. Each of us has learned to look beyond what we see. We have each learned that by simply sitting quietly and observing what is happening around us, by using our eyesight, our hearing, our smell, touch, we can tune into any situation. But there's one more sense to this equation, and that sense is going within and listening to the voice and understand that we are speaking directly to the Creator. This understanding will set you free and bring you the understanding that we are each connected. My fellow pastors, including Susan, who intuitively knew to call me at a time when I couldn't breathe, and she calmed me down so I could face another day. To the phone calls from so many of you and the prayers that were said to me each week in our healing circle, Sarah, I can't thank all of you individually today for what you've done. And by doing that, you've allowed me to speak here today. You intuitively knew that I needed you. Each of you had learned to go within and to trust that sense and to trust that you are speaking to a higher power who brings you to where you need to be. We are all part of a circle of life connected with each other. This connection makes us harmonize as one. What one is going through, we can all sense. Our sadnesses, our happiness is shared together. We are never alone. We only need to listen for the voice, for within that voice is the comfort, and that voice will speak to us, bringing us peace. It will bring peace to the circle, touching everyone's heart. Being able to speak to George so clearly brought me further confirmation of all this. And I continue to think of him and Angela. And I know, because he told me, that he'll be waiting for her when it's her time to cross over. This cycle we are all in of living and dying is a misconception, as I have learned from my own experiences and what I have read and witnessed. This circle of life never ends. It just changes. We have had so many changes in our soul's lifetimes, having experienced so many past lives, bringing us to this moment that we were in now. We have experienced both being man, we have experienced being woman, we have experienced ourselves in different cultures and regions of the world, but our soul remembers and we feel that deep connection. I have experienced several past lives, including being at war, being in England, and dying in a jousting competition. I can remember being a small child and being alone and abandoned on the side of the road in the snow to cross over when the only comfort I had were the animals that appeared to help me cross over. I have spoken of these in past talks, and these moments are as real to me today as they are standing in front of you and giving this talk. How that reading appeared to me in my bed in December when I had decided it was my time to cross over, I'll never fully understand. The circle is powerful. and brought words to me exactly when I needed to hear them. Now, I'd like each of you to just close your eyes for a few moments and let these words speak to you. Breathe. Let go of fear. You are fine just the way you are. The world does not need perfect people. It needs people who have fallen and gotten back up. People who have felt pain and let them become wiser and more compassionate. It needs people who know how to create beauty out of ugliness. You, my friend, are exactly what the world needs. You may be scared and weary, and you may not be where you want to be right now, but you survived this long. That means you have the wisdom, strength, and fortitude to make your part of the world a little more perfect. Thank you.